This is an RNZ podcast.
Kia ora iwi and welcome to Context with me, Guy Espiner.
And me, Corin Dan.
You know the drill by now. Context is the backstory to the front page story.
That's right, we take an issue making headlines today and we trace its long tail back through history.
But, of course, as listeners will know, there's a catch. Only one of us has walked into the studio today knowing what we're going to talk about.
It's true. We take turns. And Guyan, what are you going to drop on me today?
Well, I'm going to drop on you 3 letters, which if not quite make the world go round, they certainly make the wheels of government turn. You're going to love this. We're going to talk tax. We are going to talk tax today. And I want us to discuss more the taxes we don't have.
Yep.
Those taxes on wealth and capital and land.
Yep.
Why we don't have them, why we got rid of a bunch of this stuff. And there's a fascinating and rich history, even though we don't have a capital gains tax, to that form of taxation. Because, as you'd know, we have become an utter outlier in the developed world on this. We're also going to look over the next, 45 minutes or so, about the sort of capital gains tax we might get if Labour takes power after November.
We will be introducing a targeted tax on profits made after the 1st of July 2027 when a commercial property or a residential property excluding the family home is sold.
That's Chris Hipkins. And what do you think? It's quite a...
Narrow. It's narrow.
Yeah.
And that phrase there, the family home, that's the bit that gets people wound up. You know, if you were to put... The economists will still say, won't they? You got to have it on everything. You know, that's what makes sense on paper. But politically, a capital gains tax on the old family home, the one homeowner, that's where things get complicated.
Yeah, this was about as little as you could do to sort of get it across the line,
yes.
right?
Yes, and boy, and look, you got to say, given the debate, and I'm sure we'll canvass some of this over the last few years, the fact that they even had the courage to do that is interesting.
It's a long and circuitous route to the capital gains tax for Labour, and we are going to get into some of this. And we're also going to get into land tax and wealth tax because there are two parties who want those taxes now. We're going to talk about some of this. But we'll start with the capital gains tax. 38 countries in the OECD. New Zealand is one that doesn't have a capital gains tax. How many others do you reckon there are in the OECD? And bonus point if you can...
Don't have one?
That don't have one.
Oh, I don't think there'll be many at all, if any.
Yeah, there's one, Belgium. But they have wealth taxes. Okay, so when you combine the measure of no capital gains tax and no wealth tax, New Zealand genuinely is an utter outlier. We're world beaters on that.
This is the thing. I mean, like, how many times have the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD done their reports on New Zealand every couple of years? And it was sort of almost a running joke with Giles Beckford. I'd say to him, let's try and guess what they're going to say. New Zealand needs to deal something with its super and it needs to bring in a capital gains tax. I mean, And it's like that they just saw it from an economic perspective. There was no politics with those guys. No. They're just like going, your tax base isn't wide enough here. This is one thing you could do.
Yes, absolutely. So let's have a quick look at the history of the capital gains tax. I learned some pretty interesting stuff when I was swatting up for this. So we apparently inherited the British concept of income, and capital gains weren't considered income for many, many decades, right? Then Britain moved to tax capital gains in 1965, and New Zealand didn't follow suit. And interestingly, we didn't feel we needed to because we taxed other forms of capital. We had a land tax from 1878. Which was only abolished in 1990. We'll return to this because that's pretty bloody interesting. And also, you'll remember this too, because it happened in our days as journalists. We had death duties, we had gift duties, we had stamp duties. We scrapped all of those between 1990 and 2010. And so that gives you that context of how we've become a country which doesn't tax capital at all, and a position we are pretty much alone in the world. And I did want to ask you this because you spent a lot of time thinking about these matters. I mean, is there an economic argument? Take the fairness away, we'll talk about that a little bit soon. But is there an economic argument for not taxing capital?
Personally, I think that the economic argument is obviously, as I mentioned, with the OECD and the IMF and all those guys, is pretty clear. They would say you need, if you don't tax capital in the way that New Zealand does, you get an imbalance in your system. And you get capital going where it will go. Money will flow through the arteries of the economy and it'll go where it can get the best return. And if it can get a capital tax-free capital gain, it's going to go there. So, and then that skews investment, and you get the overinvestment in property and not enough investment in the businesses that you want and the productivity. And that's the economic argument. So that's always seemed pretty compelling to me, that from an economic perspective, there is a good case for taxing not one or the other, but equally, so that you don't get that imbalance. That's what you don't want.
I was going to come to this later, but since you bring this up, I'm going to flick to it now, because I think it's an important thing for people to consider when they are trying to get their heads around a tax system, because you did touch on it. Because tax, there are a couple of big reasons for tax. You get the revenue so you can fund the things you want to do. But the other thing is the thing you touched on, which is you try and tax the things higher that you don't want people to do and lower that you do want them to do. So I wanted to bring up a couple of really interesting niche stories, I suppose, or interesting ones from history. Have you got any good tax stories like that? Because I can think of a few which really changed behaviour. One of them is the window tax in Britain. You know about this?
No.
Yeah, so the window tax in Britain, 1696 to 1851, they had a window tax. Why? Because they thought it was a good proxy for wealth, right? So the tax inspector didn't need to go into your home.
Yep.
He could see from outside, well, how many windows have they got? We're going to tax them. So what happened? What do you think happened?
If nobody had any windows.
They made smaller windows.
Yeah, that's right.
And because, same, and this is probably my favourite little tax story, is the newspaper page tax, again in Britain, 1712. This led to the broadsheet because they taxed newspapers on how many pages they had.
Yep.
So what did you do? Well, you made bigger pages, so you pay less tax.
Yeah, so what you're saying there is that you can see then that is a really good example of way in which it can skew behaviour unexpectedly and not how they might have thought.
Exactly.
You can't predict the future.
That's right. And also to your point, where capital will flow to where the best return is.
Yep.
You see the same in Amsterdam. You might have been there. You see those Dutch canal houses because they had a property tax that's based on canal frontage width. Right, so anyone who's been to Amsterdam, you see those things, they're thin and tall.
Yep.
So again, they're just quite vivid examples.
Yeah, and you can just imagine someone in the tax department coming up with that, can you? Well, I know how we'll do it. We'll do the windows.
It'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine. But it is a good example to keep in people's minds about why it is that we've had such a love affair with property, because it's part of it, isn't it? That because we haven't taxed.
I mean, I suppose if you go back and so did we know? I mean, I think you've got to go back to the share market crash in '87, and it's widely considered there that the baby boomer generation piled into the equity corps and all this money, and they went into the share market in a massive way. It all crashed and came crumbling down. They lost a lot of money, and then after that, they were burned, and they went into property investing. And at that point, did we know as a country that because there was tax-free gains then we were going to see a couple of massive booms in housing where people made some extraordinary money tax-free?
Well, basically doubling every 10 years for a while.
I mean, it was probably one of those things. It was 10, 15 years later and we're like, oh, hello, this isn't good because we're seeing too much money going to property and it's creating people getting 4 or 5 houses. Government has to bring in something. What was the thing that English brought in where it was like loan? It wasn't negative gearing. It was like you could set up a little side company and have 5 houses in it, and then get away with even more tax. And so Bill English, I think, got rid of that one. So there was all these sort of mechanisms, and I suppose I'm just trying to think back, say in '87 after the crash. Did we know that there was going to be a massive property boom? Had property been booming in the same way?
Well, certainly we've looked at this a number of times, and we'll get to some of the, the grand New Zealand tradition of the working group.
Yeah.
And there've been a few of them. And I hadn't heard a couple of these.
Yeah.
There was the 1967 Ross Committee.
Oh, yep.
Now, they looked at capital gains tax, and they said a tax system where income was taxed but capital wealth wasn't taxed was unfair. But it was too complex and it needed some more work,
Wow.
and so they recommended against it. Then, in 1982, another one I hadn't heard of, the McCaw Task Force, which sounds like it's worth
I think that
listening
was
to.
a
in New
doorstop in the old gallery, wasn't it?
Was it? Have you seen that?
I'm just imagining.
The McCaw Task Force, and again, they said, and I quote this one, the task force considers that failure to tax real capital gains is inequitable in principle and is seen by many to be so. But it said, no, even though capital gains are being made by some which should in principle be taxed, we're still not going to do it. So a couple of reports there. And then you might remember this one. You might have been in the gallery for this one, in the press gallery at Parliament. Michael Cullen, he had the McLeod Review in 2001. Cullen, though, himself, he didn't like it, did he?
No, it actually rings a bell. Did he back away a little bit from that?
The McLeod Review, it recommended against a capital gains tax. But Michael Cullen, and I remember this quite well, I had a few stoushes with Cullen over the years.
Yeah.
He thought it was political suicide. He wasn't going to go anywhere near it.
Well, he probably wasn't wrong at the time, was he? Because it was right at the height of property investing booms in this country. I mean, I seem to recall from either the McLeod report or one of those, you just had all these, what would happen is you get all these scenarios put up of how it was complicated. Are stamps going to be collected? What about the person who collects toy Tonka cars? And they've gone up in value because they're rare, and do they get counted? And where does shares fit in? And where does all the artwork and all these things? And you have some people who go, you just got to put it on everything. Because otherwise you get all these weird, exemptions, and then it's like, no, we've got to carve it out, and we can't possibly have the family home. And so then you start with that exemption, and then people, it was a minefield from memory, that report. I remember it being pretty thorough, though, and I think it had a couple of options from memory of approaches.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this either until I started looking into this. The closest we got was 1989, David Cagle released a proposal to tax capital income, but it was in the dying day, and that's the neo-libs. That was
right.
the Douglas Longy government.
Yeah.
But it was the dying days. They got thrown out in 1990 and all things.
Well, if history had been different, we might have had a flat tax.
Well, yeah, that was.
that was what Douglas wanted, wasn't it?
What Roger,
was it 22% or something? Just across the, I can't even remember
what
it
it might
was.
have been closer to 20 from memory.
Just
but,
might have been 20 years.
But that was when Longy famously said,
"That's enough.
We have a cup of tea."
Yeah,
you might remember that. Okay, so. This after Helen Clark and Michael Cullen had left the stage, this issue comes back. Have a listen to this and tell me what's happening here.
What's the first year you earn any money from your capital gains tax, and how much do you get?
I'll tell you the answer to that. It starts gradually because it's not.
Okay, what's the first year and how much do you get?
It comes in about, probably about 2016, and it ramps up.
Okay.
But I'll tell you this as well.
I'll
tell you this as well.
Let me ask you one more question.
When you sell the assets, John, listen for a moment. When you sell the assets, John, you can only sell them once.
Just tell me where the money's coming. Show me the money. Show me the money.
I've got to tell you this.
It's coming from the Chinese. Who's going to borrow it from the Chinese? That's where it's coming from.
Yeah, one of the great debate moments.
Both had our head in our hands for one of the.
He just gave him an opening, didn't he? He didn't close it quick enough, and Key swooped on in there with that line, "Show me the money," which is a line from movie. What that movie? It's the Jerry Maguire.
Yes,
I'm pretty sure it's Jerry Maguire.
It is. And just for our audience who didn't clock on that, who is he debating?
Oh, that was Phil Goff.
Yeah, and
John
what election?
Well, that would have been, was it 2011?
2011.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and Goff was gone after he lost that election.
He was gone up. That was one of those blows. It was like
it was
literally
the press
like
debate.
a...
It was the press debate. It was the press debate. And, just a quick tangent here, but I think Labour's learned from
Yes,
that.
they have.
You know that old thing, I hate this saying in politics that explaining is losing, because I hate the idea that you have to dumb everything down, and I don't think you do. But it is true that when you're a political leader and you have a complex policy and you get hit up like that, and Key was very good on, obviously very good on business and economics, And it just really
Well, he did it
smashed
with
him,
a
didn't
smile and a laugh
Yeah,
as well.
I know, it was brutal,
well, they
wasn't it?
have learnt because
Because this one's simple, eh?
And they acknowledge too, and they acknowledge it doesn't actually earn a lot of money. Because what Goff was trying to explain there is that it
kicks in
takes
slowly.
it takes in a
Because
few
it's
years.
long time. It's a long time. It's like compulsory super, eh?
Yeah.
If you've had it in since the 70s, 80s, 90s, you've got a lot of money in there.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to Labour's thing right at the end. But so Goff goes in 2011, but in 2014, Labour tried again.
We are going to target those who speculate on capital gains. And we are going to make sure that those who try to avoid tax using trusts can't. Our capital gains tax doesn't apply to family homes and trusts.
So who's that?
That's David Cunliffe.
Yeah,
Yes.
another crack.
He did.
And it didn't go well for him. Do you remember Labour's share of the vote in 2014?
They got obliterated, didn't they? Yeah. Their worst result. Yeah, I mean, Cunliffe
25%
came in, didn't he? Didn't Labour run a sort of a runoff? I can't remember. They went around the country. He came in as a sort of he was the left of the party.
Yeah, and there were three Davids involved,
Yes,
weren't they? and one of them won,
Yep.
and that was him. But he lost the election, obviously. Okay, so that's two strikes down. Then it comes back under Jacinda Ardern, and they have another crack at this. Tell me who this is and what the context is.
I see it as a report that's done the job that we asked of it, which was to come up with a series of packages. And I think most New Zealanders, when they read this, will see that the group's fulfilled that mandate, that yes, they've given some recommendations about what you could do to expand around capital income, but they've also given recommendations about what that might mean for cuts to personal taxes. That sounds to me like exactly the job that we asked of them. I'm not 100% sure what a hairy-chested package would look like.
That was Grant Robertson.
Yeah.
Did they have their own little inquiry?
That was the Cullen review.
Yeah,
that was
to
the
look
Cullen
into
review.
that.
Yeah. So, but of course, Labour lost its nerve, and in April 2019, we got this.
We have tried to build a mandate, but ultimately have been unsuccessful. For that reason, I am today setting out that for certainty's sake, that under my leadership, we will no longer campaign for or implement a capital gains tax. Not because I don't believe in it, but because I don't believe New Zealand does.
Interesting, eh? Not because I don't believe in it, but because I don't think New Zealand does.
Yeah, they just waved the white flag, really, didn't they?
They did. What was the other factor that forced their hand? What was the other barrier to Labour being able to do that?
So what year was that again?
So that was 2019. So that's their first coalition.
Presumably Winston was like, no, thank you very much.
Exactly.
And he put the kibosh on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here he is fronting the media on it.
Were you ever going to agree to a capital gain tax, though?
Look, we were happy to look at it very, very carefully and look at the international examples. But we said at the very beginning, you recall, there's not going to be an explosion in the accountancy or valuation professions. We're not going to listen to the scaremongering and shroud-waving of some political entities and others in this country. And we're going to deliver you a simple taxation regime, and we have.
Yeah, so they didn't have the numbers. They didn't have... Well, she never really campaigned for it, though, did
No, I seem to
what's your
recall
view
there was
on
a bit
that?
of a... Well, wasn't there in the 2017 campaign, quite late in the campaign, they lost their nerve on this as well?
They did, because...
and they were getting hammered
They
on
were
it.
getting hammered because they had talked about a tax review and that all these things would be on the table. And they took that classic thing in politics where you go, I'm not going to rule this, I'm going to rule this out. And then someone says, well, what about a land tax? And then the headline is, Ardern fails to rule out land tax because you're not ruling it out.
They were hemorrhaging votes.
And they were hemorrhaging votes.
And they actually rolled out Cullen to do ads to
Did
try.
they?
Yeah,
Oh,
he
yeah,
did an
did they?
ad. I was politically literate at that time, and they were because there was the Jacinda wave, and we had these polls showing them ahead of Bill English, and there was a real fight back from Bill English and National, and the tax was, tax was the way they got back in the game, I think, to some extent.
And you'll probably see that again this time, won't you?
Yep.
It's always
already out there. The billboards are already out there.
Yeah, it's always Labour's biggest vulnerability. isn't it? Really.
It is.
It's economic management and especially tax. And it's such a fertile ground for the centre-right parties and National particularly to attack Labour on.
Yeah, it's interesting because John Key had a little poke around because you see the issues, take the politics out of this, the issues, most even right-wing politicians could see this as well. If you go back to sort of the key years, the housing market was causing massive problems. Huge amounts of money was flooding into the country. The dollar was going up to 80 cents US.
Yeah, where are we now? 58?
Yeah, 58. Key called it. Key was like, I remember, he was very obviously a currency trader. He predicted 80 cents about 3 or 4 months before it happened. And a part of it was because of all this money was flooding. Interest rates was high. It wasn't killing off the housing market. Cullen talked about a mortgage levy. They were going to put a levy on people's mortgages to try and cool things down at one point. And Key had a look at it. He had a look at a stamp duty. He had a look at a stamp tax. Kicked it around and then went, nah. But he had a look, and they were because they were worried about it as well.
Yeah, all right. We're going to look into wealth and land in a second, but we just do a quick pop quiz on you, and I think you I think you got a good head start on some of these anyway. Before we leave the CGT, who was the big CEO who came out in 2024 in favour of a CGT?
Oh, that must have been with your interview, was it? Antonio Watson.
Yeah. Antonio Watson, who was the chief executive of ANZ, which is the biggest bank, isn't it?
Biggest bank.
Yeah. Okay, I think you've already mentioned some of these. I was going to ask you to name 5 international or domestic financial institutions.
Oh, I'll give you a go, though. You've got the OECD, you've got the IMF, you've got the World Bank, you've got Treasury and probably the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could probably add... Could you add IRD to that? No, I might be corrected on that, but
they may well have.
You got your 5. For our audience, what is the Bright Line test and where does it sit now?
Okay, so the Bright Line test has gone back to 2 years, I think. So this is effectively a test that because technically, if you're operating as a property investor and you're running as a business, you really should be paying tax as a business.
So that's weirdly where we do have a capital gains tax in the sense that if you sell it within a certain time, if you are
2 years.
What they call flipping properties, and it's a 2-year test.
Yeah,
so literally, if I bought a house in Mount Roskill today and sold it in 18 months and made $100,000, I'd have to pay tax on that, would I?
Yes, because you're effectively operating as a business within that 2 years. Now, Labor pushed that right out to 10 years, I think.
Yes, they did. Yeah, or
5,
I think
10.
Yeah, and then Luxon.
So it made it a capital gains tax by default.
Yeah,
Some
and then
people
Luxon
argue.
pulled it right back to 2
But the
again,
problem is, and this was always the problem in IRD, it's a grey area. Right, they call it a bright line test because they're trying to brighten it up because it's hard to tell. What was my intention?
Yeah.
Was I intending to operate as a business and flip this property? Oh, no, I just have to move. I didn't want to do that. No, that wasn't my intention.
I see.
So you're trying to prove, and so they brought that in to make it much clearer, that limit, because before that, it was up to their interpretation. You know?
Yeah. Okay, last one on this. This is a little bit of a harder one. I don't know that I would have got this. Labor's capital gains tax only applies to investment properties and commercial real estate. We've talked about that. It's a flat rate on profits from the sale. Levied at what rate?
Is it the marginal rate? Is it
No. It's the company rate, which
is at 28.
28, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's what Labor's proposing, which is high-ish.
Well, I think that's right, isn't it?
Because they went 15 back in the day. But anyway, it's a narrow.
Well, they probably just wouldn't be able to raise enough money if they didn't go higher. It doesn't raise a lot of money to start with.
No,
that
I think they've already spent it 3 times.
Yes. Well, they were clever to link it.
Well, yeah,
they linked it to the health things.
To the health
because
stuff,
that's what they'll do on the campaign.
Yes, that's right. They'll have a card, eh?
Yeah.
Like
they'll walk around and go, look, you can criticise.
You've got a health card. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, so, I get the politics. Okay, I want to talk about wealth tax. There was one major proponent in the Labor Party for a wealth tax. Who was that?
That'll be David Parker.
That's right, and here he is pushing it.
If you earn more wages or salaries, you pay more tax because you pay tax on every dollar you earn. That's not true of income from capital. There are different ways of fixing that. The 2 main ways are through either a capital gains tax or a wealth tax. And in the Labor Party, we're having an internal discussion as to which, if either, of those we should be pursuing.
And that internal discussion got
torpedoed.
Yeah. And what did he do?
He scurried off.
He quit his portfolio, didn't he?
Yeah. He's a very interesting guy, David Parker. And I literally did talk to him about Thomas Piketty.
Yeah.
You know, like he was the one guy. And so for listeners, Thomas Piketty's this French economist who shot to fame because he'd gone right back through history and looked at capital and capital tax on capital and wealth taxes and all this issue. And it was mounting the argument from the left about why, with the evidence of like hundreds of years of research about why this was necessary. And the one guy who really did take this seriously was David Parker. He spent a lot of time thinking about it and arguing and wanting to talk about it.
Yeah, he did. And he lost in that internal discussion. So without Labour, it's the Green Party pushing a wealth tax.
Right now, the wealthiest are paying just $9 in tax for every $100, while a teacher is paying $22. Not only is that fundamentally unfair, but it is robbing us all of the investment in the things that we as a country, as an economy, as people and as communities need. That means implementing a super rich tax for net wealth above $10 million, excluding the family home, a capital acquisitions tax for net wealth above $1 million received, excluding the family farm and family home.
It's a bit of an incantation, that excluding the family home, isn't it? As
Got to get it in there.
Before. Yeah, that's right. So this wealth tax, I mean, the Green policy is a 2.5% a year tax on net assets above 10 million for individuals, 20 million for couples, excluding the family home. Yeah, it's interesting. There's some high-profile advocates of wealth tax, like this guy.
These people are not making money from their work. They are making money because they own your country. They own your land, they own your natural resources, they own your property, they own your mortgages, they own your debt. You have to make a choice, basically. Do you want the people who own your country to pay tax or not to pay tax? And that's a choice that the New Zealand public can make. But if you choose to allow them not to pay tax, you cannot be surprised when the ordinary public becomes impoverished in the long term.
You know who that is?
Yes, that's Gary Stevenson, isn't it?
Yeah. He's a compelling character.
Yes, he's got a big profile online.
He does.
Massive YouTube following in the UK. His mission is to convince people that the inequality is sending the UK to ruin and other countries like New Zealand, and that the only way to solve it is a wealth tax, in his view. Because his main argument is that those with a lot of money have got so wealthy they just end up buying all the assets and squeeze everybody else out, and no one can afford to buy a house. That seems sort of a central argument.
Yeah. What do you see as the major problem with wealth taxes?
The major problem still is the capital flight risk.
Yeah.
And that's what they need to have that concise answer for. And I was hearing, there's been quite a bit of debate about this in the last few days about the Treasury numbers and who got,
That's true. Actually, I hadn't looked at that.
It
was
the
Green policy, isn't it?
Thomas Colgan, the Herald, and others have looked into this because they've argued that the Greens took the lower end of the figure or something, and the Treasury's. I won't go into the full details, but
just for people uninitiated on this, capital flight is when you go, oh my God, this country's taxing me too much. I'm going to get out and I'm going to park my wealth offshore, right? Effectively.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing that struck me about when I was reading a little bit about this stuff over the last few days is Australia, and how easy it would be for New Zealanders to go.
Yes, because we are
And
probably
how do
more
you-
mobile. And I just wanted to take you through a couple of these because I think this is pretty interesting for people who get excited and about wealth taxes. Because in 1990, 12 European countries had wealth taxes. Today, 4 do. Okay, so you've got Norway, Spain, Switzerland and Colombia all have wealth taxes. So the repeals, Austria, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, Finland, Iceland, Luxembourg, Sweden and famously France in 2018, all backed away from wealth taxes and did so largely on that basis of capital flight.
Yeah, so that's what the Greens are going to need to convince people. I mean, there's a patriotic element to it where they say, well, the people live here. Why would they take their money out? And you do get wealthy individuals who come out and say, I'm happy to pay it. I would pay it because they worry about inequality and those sort of things. But I guess it's just if you look at it less of a personal thing and more of an aggregate, is there a risk that, capital would, for example, quite easily just go across the Tasman to Australia? I mean, they've got tax over there as well, and I think they've got some capital gains taxes over there.
Yeah, they do. They've been increasing them, actually.
Yeah. So that might be the argument.
Well,
but,
Nicola Willis was trying to get money to come back the other way, remember?
And maybe that's a good argument, but I suppose that is the one area that you've got to convince people that it's not going to lead, because governments, it's pretty hard to control capital come, look at China or somewhere trying to control its money going in or out.
We did do when we were Fortress.
It's a tricky process, that one.
We did so when we were Fortress New Zealand under Muldoon, but you can listen back to another episode of Context if you want to hear about that. Okay, let's finish with land tax and then we'll quickly return to CGT right at the end. One party is very keen on this land tax, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So we think we need some kind of tax on property in New Zealand. Housing affordability has gone through the roof, and if we want our kids and the next generation to be able to own their own home, we really need to do something here. We think a land tax is more effective, particularly in New Zealand, where things like land banking and large property portfolios are becoming more and more common. Because if you have a capital gains tax, essentially those people will hold on to those properties for longer to avoid paying the tax.
Yeah, that's so. Who's that?
That's Kwile Wong.
From
The Opportunity. It used to be Gareth Morgan's idea, didn't it? I think he started it. I think he called it the Big Kahuna. It was him and another economist. And my apologies to her, I think, because there was another. I think it was another woman who wrote it with him. They called it the. I think that's the origins of that tax policy.
Yeah. It's certainly not like a hard left idea. It's more sort of intellectual than that. So they're talking about a 1.75 tax on land tax on residential. And I think it's a 0.5 on rural land. The big problem with this, though, and something that people need to realise, and she did talk about it in that grab you heard from Kwile Wong, it's not on realisation. It's not on sale. So that's the difference people need to get into their heads right. The CGT, the capital gains tax, is when I sell the home and the money comes in. Let's say I've sold it and I've paid $100,000 and the tax is 28%. And
you think, oh, well, I still made a big gain.
I still made, 720. Yes. But the difficulty with the land tax, or the difficulty for the payer of the land tax, is it's levied every year on the value of your land.
It's like a council rate in some ways.
Yeah.
But you're right, and that, again, and I know you've talked to her about this, and this is, again, the issue where they need to be very clear about explaining it, because for the pensioner on the fixed income or whatever who isn't earning anymore, but that's still racking up, they would then pay that against their estate, right?
Yeah, but that hurts, eh? If you've deferred, I crunched just a quick example. So if you're living in the classic Auckland villa that you bought in the 1950s or 60s, and you're some pensioner living there, your partner's gone or whatever, and it's worth $2 million. You'd be paying $35,000 a year.
Yeah.
And you can defer it till death, but then there ain't much left on the estate for the kids, is there?
No, basically, that's your inheritance.
That's gone.
Gone.
That's right. Now, I should say, to be fair to Opportunity, that they are going to have a universal basic income of $20,000 a year. So who knows? You can go to their site and do the calculations, see how you go. But I just want to bring this up about the history of the land tax just quickly, because I didn't know this. So we had a land tax in 1878, right? We were probably the first country in the world to have one, and we got most of our tax from a land tax, right? So, but in 1895, so what's that, 10, 15 years after it was introduced, it made up 76% of the government's land and income tax revenue. Okay, so we got most of the revenue. Before we even really had income taxes, we taxed land, big time. So we had this tax, and we had it right through to 1990.
1990?
Yeah, we did. But in the intervening years, it had shrunk away. By the 60s, it was 6% of direct revenue. That Ross committee I talked about before, they said, look, it had shrunk wide away. You had all these exemptions from it. You had, massive exemptions, so massive holes in it. And in that 1990 government,
the attraction with a land tax, now I think about it, the attraction with it really is that it will incentivise people not to sit on land.
Land bank.
It will say use it. And if they're using it for productive means, farming or whatever, then they won't be so worried about paying the tax because they're making money from it. But if you're just leaving it there at a time when you could argue we need more housing, then it does start to sound more attractive. That argument anyway.
Yeah. And just before we leave it, so people, just to tick these off, because we also did away with the inheritance tax, abolished in 1992. We did away with stamp duty, which is basically you stamp.
I think they use that in Australia. In
yeah,
some
they
places.
still do. So if
15% or something, bang, right on the sale.
So $1 million house, 150 grand to the government. Thanks very much. So that's a stamp duty. We did away with that in 1999, and gift duty was finally abolished in 2011. So we don't have a lot of these taxes. So just to finish with capital gains tax, just right at the end. So yeah. Do you think the time's finally come? I suppose. I mean, Labor's proposing it.
Well, the great irony, Guy, is that the housing market's tanked.
That's right.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
We're finally going to do it, and we don't have any capital gains.
This is the problem. No one's making any capital gains at the moment. So maybe
New Zealand thinks about it for decades, and then brings it in when there's no capital growth at all.
I just those poor people who bought houses in the post-COVID boom and who are in negative equity right now, the last thing they're thinking is, you bring in capital gains tax.
Yeah.
So in some ways the heat's been taken out of it, plus the re-emergence of KiwiSaver and younger generations investing in other things. So maybe I do think it's pretty tied to that baby boomer generation and the property boom, because people made huge gains. That was the problem. Some of those capital gains on housing, I mean, in Auckland, and there was 2 or 3 booms there. It felt
you'd
like
wake up and your house had gone up like 15k or something.
There was a period there where it was not good for the country. It wasn't good for young people trying to get into houses. It wasn't good for businesses and getting productive capital into the right places. Whether you like the capital gains tax or not, those booms, I think, we can't afford to keep going through them. That where you get these crazy property booms. Some people are lucky; they happen to buy at the right time or whatever. And then people work hard too. And some people that we need to have landlords. I don't want to bag landlords. People have to provide housing. That's a role. That's a job. It's not easy at the moment. That's the other thing. Landlords out there are not doing it easy. A lot are having to tip money in because they might, or people who have been convinced property's the only way. They bought that second home, they leveraged themselves, and all of a sudden they're finding they have to put extra money in because the rent doesn't cover it. It's not easy, and I don't want to bag those people who are providing housing because someone's got to do it, but I just think the environment has changed. So maybe Labor won't get the blowback, but I can't imagine, you can imagine National will run pretty hard with their ads and their social media, and all of them will. They'll go pretty hard at Labor's tax. That's just how elections work in this country, isn't it?
I knew you'd love this one. I knew you'd love talking tax.
Oh, yeah. Tax is love, Diane, isn't it?
That's right.
Isn't that what someone came up with that? I don't know. That was very bizarre.
I think it might have been Max Harris.
Yeah, could have been.
From memory, but
I don't know about that.
He can flick me an email if that's not true.
Yep.
I knew you'd love talking tax.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Good stuff.
Thanks for listening to Context. You can follow and listen to Context for free at rnz.co.nz or wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can watch the show on YouTube. Just search for Context RNZ. And if there's something that's in the news that you want some context for, flick us an email, context@rnz.co.nz. It's hosted by me, Guy Espiner, and Corin Dan. Our producer is Miranda Fisher. Our sound and video editor is Corey Fuimaono. A special thanks to Jamie Annan for additional camera support. Our production coordinator is Brianna Juritich-Gregg, and our EP, executive producer, is Tim Watkin.